issues are quite different from, say, China issues or new immigrant issues of people who come from China. So I think it's important to make that distinction and figure out what exactly the story is that you want to cover. One interesting thing about covering some identity topics when you're here in Hong Kong is that a lot of Western media or US media, there's this demand on minorities to kind of justify their existence or their place in the United States. Whereas being in a newsroom out in Asia, it's a lot of editors will push you in the direction of like, can you please link this story back to why you belong in America or why you exist or why you are relevant to today's culture, which I think is it's just a little unfortunate, but it's also freeing to be able to launch something like Goldthread without the pressure of having to justify the existence of your own identity.
And something that we've noticed on shoots, right now, the core of our team, you know, are people like us, American-born Chinese or Canadian-born Cantonese, and we just blend in really well, and people give us access that we would not get if, say, there was, you know, a white face in our crew traveling around. So that's been really refreshing to see, and being able to publish these stories as well without getting the why does this matter to people.
Right. So we're about to go on YouTube Live. We're not leaving here, but, you know, we'll just put on some graphics for YouTube so that we can test things out. But if you guys like this platform more, tell us in the comments so that next time we can adjust to what you are interested in. So we'll see you guys on Facebook, but we'll keep talking to you here.
We'll see you on YouTube.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We'll see you on YouTube. We're about to queue it up on YouTube. We have a really fun little intro sequence there. And then
now,
we'll put up,
live from
for
Hong
those
Kong,
who don't have our YouTube
it's
link, I'm
Late
going to
Night
post it in the
with
comments right
Goldthread.
now.
Our host, Dolly Lee.
That is us on
and
YouTube.
guest host, Clarissa
Goldthread.
Wei. It's
And-
Late Night.
And I will
with
monitor the
Goldthread.
Facebook comments. So for the
Might not
people
actually be night.
chilling on Facebook, I'm still reading your comments, so feel free to
Yeah.
talk.
Feel free to keep messaging us there so that we can have you guys on multiple platforms to talk to. And we will be live soon. About I tried to be a freelancer, but I didn't get a single gig.
I think
I'm
it's
sorry.
persistent. I was a freelance writer for 7 years, so
It's tough. Being a freelance writer
keep
is
on
tough.
doing it.
I think it's not just like pitching stories. Sometimes it's hard to convince a newsroom why this story matters, and
And it's relationship building, right?
Right.
Like, you just have to find an editor or a couple of editors who really like you and keep on that relationship. It's not necessarily just about your skills. It's about building long-term relationships.
yeah, definitely about that as well. So we are live on YouTube now, I believe.
Are
Let's
we?
see. We're trying to be. Doesn't look like we are live on YouTube just yet.
Man, all these fancy gadgets.
We're live, we're live, we're live. We cannot see our comments.
Are we live on YouTube?
We do not see our stream on YouTube, unfortunately. It's not on our channel, unfortunately. Just gonna listen. Okay. Sorry, guys. We are just trying to figure this out. This is really new for us, so thank you for being patient and for engaging with us, because we really want to do this every single week, because I think this is a fun way for us to get to know you guys, for you to get to know us, for us to share some ideas. But a lot of little snafus, so bear with us. Keep sending questions our way.
Yeah, keep sending questions. We'll just keep on answering questions while we wait for technical issues to be resolved.
Yeah, I cannot find our stream on YouTube, unfortunately. Does anyone? Let's see.
But I guess I can start going into mushroom stuff. I just got back from a 5-day trip in Yunnan, where a lot of things happened. We're sort of in the countryside. Our videographer, Nick, said he had never been to such a small Chinese town, but I mean, it was fine. We had to climb a random mountain, sort of told our taxi driver to look for mushrooms for us because our source was unable to do so that morning.
I figured, okay, since we can't find the YouTube link, maybe we just speak to the Facebook link.
Sure.
Because I cannot find this YouTube link.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's pretend like we haven't been talking to you guys for mad long, but here we are. I'm Dolly. I am the head of content here at Goldthread. We just launched last month. And with me is Clarissa, who is our senior reporter and food connoisseur. Clarissa and I both moved from the States to build this publication here in Hong Kong. I moved from Oakland, though I'm from Brooklyn, and Clarissa is from LA.
Yeah, I got a call from Dolly and Victoria. Hi, Vicky, who is our executive producer. I remember the date exactly, January 2nd.
Really?
I was in Tainan with my two friends. We were eating, small eats, and at this time I already had a one-way ticket booked to the Amazon rainforest because that was sort of my life plan.
Right.
I was going to move to the Amazon rainforest and hang out with indigenous tribes and figure out and learn more about regenerative enterprises and agroforestry, which is really my passion. And then Dolly and Victoria were like, do you want to move to Hong Kong? And they convinced me. At first I was not reluctant about the project, but reluctant about Hong Kong. Mega cities are not my thing. I lived in New York City for 4 years. But I'm glad that I'm here. I get to travel to mainland China and get to do stories where I get to hang out with people who live off of the land and do some of the things that I am passionate about still. So Hong Kong's still an adjustment for me. I don't speak any Cantonese, and large cities stress me out. But it's for the stories.
And, if you guys haven't seen Clarissa's work, a lot of her pieces, a lot of her journalism covers the way people interact with the land, the way people live off the land, and the way food and culture is very much tied to the history of food itself. So, China is a huge country, and that part of the reason why we're out here is because there is so much to cover. It's about the same size as the U.S., which means that there's a lot of land out here.
Mm-hmm.
Much of the country is still agricultural, despite most of the coverage that we see in media being mostly urban. There's a ton of agricultural stuff happening here. Most people are still in the rural parts of China, and that's what makes for super interesting stories. Seeking those communities that we don't often see in very traditional media.
Yeah, and I feel like in mainstream American media, for example, the coverage of China is very, not limited to, but focuses heavily on politics and business, and that makes sense. But there's so much more to that, and I feel like access to these stories haven't necessarily been granted because a lot of reporters who go into China can't converse with these people as easily as we can,
Definitely. And even for us, it's tough, right? Like, Clarissa speaks Mandarin, and I speak Cantonese and some Mandarin. And then when we cross over from Hong Kong into mainland China, everything becomes Mandarin. But even on top of that, people have very thick accents and there are different dialects. And it's not so simple as, someone is British versus someone is speaking American English. Like when we were in Sichuan earlier this year, even with being able to speak Mandarin, the Sichuan accent and dialect, because of the geographical location of Sichuan, means that there are a lot of different regional mixes that go into their language, and sometimes you have no idea what's going on, and you can speak as many languages as you want, but if you don't know the dialect, you don't know the dialect.
Someone asked for a link to my content. So all of our articles are housed on goldthread2.com. That's goldthread2. .com, but you can read some of my past pieces on my own website, which is Clarissa Wei, WEI.com.
So I wanted to shift our conversation a little bit to talking about what Clarissa has been working on and what you guys will be seeing from Goldthread in the upcoming weeks. We just launched a new series called Wild that's very much about the land and the people who live on this land and live with this land. The very first piece that we put out is from Yunnan. It's a tea hike that Clarissa went on to find the largest tea tree. So let's cue that video up and play for you guys. We're going to show you a little Instagram clip. And you will be able to see this on Facebook. You will be able to see this on YouTube.
Yeah, so you can see this clip on YouTube.
And then we'll try and post a link for you up here as well.
For Facebook people, we're going to post the link.
If you guys aren't following us on Instagram, that's where we do a lot of our fun
就相信
videos.
特别大的这个树里
So
边，
we're
它一定是有一个
copying and pasting that
神
link
灵，
now to
它可
our
以保
tea
佑
hike
它周边
teaser.
的这些动植物啊、生灵，让它们世世代代的繁衍下去。
So yes, you can see. I believe the video is still playing. So yes, for those who are just joining, we are also streaming on YouTube. And on YouTube, we are... So right now on YouTube, we're showing some of our content that we've been working on, including this series called Wild. So Clarissa, you just came back from Yunnan, and let's talk about this new series, Wild. What is it about? What is the core of it about? And tell us a little bit about the Pu'er.
Yeah, so this whole series started with the Pu'er hike. One of my tea friends in Taiwan had called me up and was like, I am hiking to one of the oldest tea trees in the world and the largest one, and we decided to send me and a freelancer over there to shoot and package this video. And I guess we had this conversation, decided to make this an ongoing series because there's so many of these stories out there. And that's sort of the goal to, in most of these Wild series, there's not necessarily a host, but a character that sort of guides you through China. And I think we've seen, Discovery Channel, there's the Born in China, the Disney movie that does with pandas. Have you seen that one? But China is always seen, especially from a nature part, you're kind of looking from it from a further perspective, but Wild really brings you in. So, I mean, that hike, I don't know if I even mentioned that in our video, but that was a 6-hour hike. It was a 10-hour drive and a 6-hour hike, and I stayed up there in the mountain for two nights.
For our viewers who are new to tea and may not understand much about tea, the tea tree and the tea that this region is famous for is called Pu'er. The region itself is called Pu'er. And why exactly is Pu'er tea so expensive and prized that people are safeguarding these trees?
So the people in that area, I was staying with the E-Village, it has always been a part of their culture, but its market value was brought up in the 60s and 70s, actually by Hong Kong and Taiwanese connoisseurs. So Pu'er tea just refers to tea that's produced in that area, and that area is Pu'er County in Yunnan. And a lot of people know it as, the tea and the cakes, and that's just one style of Pu'er. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the cakes that you get, but it was Hong Kong and Taiwanese connoisseurs who started tasting this tea, and they're like, oh, this is really good. Especially in Taiwan, where oolong tea was a staple. A lot of the old tea masters, they were drinking oolong, and they're like, this kind of irritates my stomach. And when they had Pu'er, which in the post-fermented state is a lot more earthy and darker, it's kind of reminiscent of coffee, they're like, oh, this really soothes my stomach. And so these two places raised up the market value. And back then, Hong Kong and Taiwan were sort of the international or forward-facing leaders of the Greater China area. And because they brought up the market value, that's why Pu'er tea now is so expensive.
Right. And yes, we are taking questions. So if you guys have questions on YouTube or Facebook, please just send them over to us. We'll take a few along the way. One thing that you'll notice in Clarissa's video about Pu'er tea is that the trees, the tea trees, are numbered. Why is that?
The tea trees are numbered by the government in order to track them. And And so that was sort of a problem in the area I was at. I was at the Ilau National Scenic Forest area, and it was heavily guarded. Like, you had to have a permit to go in, and every old tea tree was sort of branded with a number, and that's just so people can keep track of it. Because in the past, people would go in and pick the tea leaves illegally and sell it, because the market value of wild tea trees is so much more than, the planted, cultivated varieties.
Yes, and for, pu'er, it took me actually a long time to figure out what it was in Cantonese. Cantonese people call pu'er tea bolei ta, which you've probably had at dim sum. It's probably one of the darkest teas that you could get there, and a lot of people like to drink it as a digestive. So that's kind of what it's known for, like Clarissa said, being the tea equivalent of coffee. And now, I want to move on to talking about what else is coming next in this Wild series, because we've got a lot of really great stuff. We shot a lot of really amazing stories, especially out in the countryside in Sichuan. And Clarissa just came back from Yunnan this week. And it happens to be mushroom foraging season out here in Yunnan. So can you tell us a little bit about what are people foraging and what is that market like?
Yeah, so the mushroom season runs from July to about October, but the strongest part of that season is right now, July, August, and maybe a little bit of September. And Nanhua County, which is about a 1 hour bullet train outside of Kunming, which is Kunming is the capital of Yunnan. This is the hub of the wild mushroom market. And every single year, people will buy mushrooms from the rural folks who live by the mountains and sell these mushrooms internationally. So I actually went to a porcini exporter, and all of those porcinis were being processed and exported to Germany and France. And then I also went to a mushroom market there where there are over 40 varieties of different mushrooms as well. And so it's this whole economy that pops up for about 2 to 3 months a year, and it just completely rotates around wild mushrooms. And I had the awesome opportunity the last time I was in Yunnan for the tea story to talk to people from the Kunming Botany Institute, and they said in the whole Greater China area and Southeast Asia, Yunnan, the level of knowledge about mushrooms is the level of mushroom knowledge is the strongest in China compared to, say, Myanmar or Laos or Thailand, even though Southeast Asia is also abundant in wild mushrooms. So a lot of researchers are interested in going in Yunnan, logging the information that these villagers know, documenting traditional ecological knowledge, and sharing that across borders as well, which is important for, the medicine industry as well as for culinary purposes as well.
So do you know about an estimate of how much of, say, Europe or the U.S.'s mushrooms come from this region?
It's only wild mushrooms, so I don't know the numbers. But we're getting that. I've been interviewing professors for that. But I can tell you at that one company that I was at, all of those porcinis went straight to Europe. And this was the largest porcini exporter in Nanhua. And Nanhua is probably the most famous city for wild mushrooms in China. So that's just some perspective.
Yeah. And to give you guys a little bit of a taste, let's cue up the Yunnan tea hike. We put together a short clip for you guys to have a look at, to give you a sense of what's going on in that region and what Clarissa and Nick, one of our other video producers, was looking at and the world that they were experiencing. The interesting things about mushrooms is that, one, I guess a lot of people don't realize or expect the biodiversity that China has to offer. And two, it's a very international facing market. So, a lot of this is also about understanding the source and origins of the things that you eat. And let's see. Yes. So let's see. We'll queue up this video for you guys.
But while we're waiting, how long does it take to create an episode? Completely depends.
Yeah. Word.
a repeat.
Cool. Right. So if you guys have any questions about what you just saw, we saw a lot of different clips from the recent trip in Yunnan that we'll be putting together for the for one of the future episodes of the new Wild video series. You saw there was a huge variety that you even saw in just that tiny clip of the different mushrooms that Nick and Clarissa got to see. And we'll be taking questions as well. So, towards the end, we'll answer some of the ones that we haven't addressed yet. Feel free to send them to us on Facebook or YouTube. We'll answer all of them right here. But, just to continue on our Yunnan and the conversation about Wild, what else can we expect to see in Wild, and why are stories about the land so important?
So I have an upcoming Taiwan trip, and we're going to be visiting one of the most remote tribes in Taiwan. That's a 4-hour drive up. And they are also the guardians of an ancient grove. That's kind of a theme that I'm into, old trees. I really like trees. And then we're also going to Taidong with an indigenous family where they actually forage and cook and have a restaurant based on foods from their indigenous culture. And they use ingredients that they get from the forest.
Cool. So you guys stay tuned. We'll be updating the Wild series. If you have other ideas for stories you'd like us to cover, please let us know. We are always open to feedback, taking pitches. And, to cap this, we want to answer some of the questions that you guys sent us on Facebook and YouTube. Some of your questions about the work we do, media, how we got into this. So let's start with some on, let's start with some on Facebook.
Ask questions, you guys.
So one of the questions was, does tea have medicinal value too?
Yes.
Yes. Well, my dad always told me that if you drink enough green tea, you won't get cancer. So there you go.
Tea does have high levels of antioxidants, but it also depends on the quality, and it really differs, I think. The way Chinese people use medicinal value is very different than how we use it in the West. For example, I would say it has therapeutic values rather than medicinal values. So pu'er, for example, is really good for soothing the stomach, especially after a heavy oily meal. Green tea and white tea, teas that are on the less oxidized scale of things, are really good for in the morning when you're just waking up. And it also depends on the quality of the tea. So the tea teachers and researchers I hang out with are really adamant on drinking tea that has not been laced with pesticides, because if you think about it, that pesticide goes directly on the leaf and into your drink. So they think and strongly say that pesticides negate the therapeutic values of tea. So that's a really broad question.
And our next question, we got a question about, will the future of China involve increasing its production of media representing itself in the world? And followed up with something about a comparison to anime in Japan. Okay, well, I think any country that has money is going to invest itself into media. The US being the number one best media production, best representation, best propaganda machine that exists. And I'm not sure if in our lifetime any country could catch up to how powerful and strong the US is in terms of crafting, shaping, and controlling its image. Even though I know the U.S. is going through some tough times right now, but that is still that the U.S. media machine is still the one that the world looks to in terms of finding the example for how to craft your media image. Now, I believe that in covering China, it's not so much about improving or not improving its image or what it represents. To me, it's a practical thing. Okay, if you think about it in terms of, Clarissa and I happen to be niche journalists. We are niche because we cover China and Chinese things. But China and Chinese things account for something like 1/7 of the population. And this is just the country of China, right? We're not even talking about the diaspora. So our niche topic is a huge population that, if you just think about, in terms of the amount that is out there for us to cover, I think of it as more almost opportunistic more than anything else.
And especially in regards to food systems, which is why I've been going really deep into where food comes from. China and America, for example, are linked in food trade. Most of America's soybeans goes to China. Like I said, a lot of the porcini and wild mushrooms that are grown in China go directly to Europe. The West and the East are interlinked, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, dairy industry as well. A lot of the dairy industry, I mean, though China is not known to be a lactose consuming country, with modernization and globalization, it has become that way, and a lot of U.S. dairy is purchased by China.
Tilapia, for example, the only reason why Americans know about tilapia is because Chinese people farm it, and a lot of the tilapia comes from China as well.
Right. So, but back to what we were saying about, this being a good opportunity to capitalize on a portion of the world that's not covered. I think it's also a great advantage to be able to speak the languages. It definitely helps to navigate that world more. And another series that we've been working on are these internet explainers about China. And that's something that we believe is important in terms of seeing what's out there in the world. The Chinese internet is one that we know very, very little about, but people are consuming all types of information. Like one time, me and my cousin who lives in China were talking about Vine. And then I was like, how do you even access Vine? And he was saying that there are people who just port this content over the firewall and they're able to access all of this supposedly banned content because people are able to import it. So I think it's something we should be aware of when on the U.S. side, we don't see what's happening on this side of the world, but on this side of the world, they see everything that's happening in the U.S. Like the number of people who are able to very accurately describe to me the difference between the Electoral College and the popular vote, and then, explain how the U.S. essentially elected its current president, is very surprising. So, that's one thing in terms of making sure we get more information about the rising power that's happening here, and understanding what people are doing, how people function, how they use the internet, how they communicate. I think this is all very important for the future of understanding how trade, how industries are changing and shifting. And yeah.
Oh, so one of our earlier questions was, how did Goldthread start? I'll let Dolly answer that.
Right. So Goldthread was a little fragment of a dream out here in Hong Kong. So we are a startup incubated by the South China Morning Post, which is a really, really old English language newspaper. It's 115 years old. It started in the 1800s during the last, I think when China still had its last emperor, the Manchurian emperor. And back then, it was two people who started it. One of them was this revolutionary who wanted to overthrow this Chinese emperor who was actually put in place by Japan. So it started with this revolutionary radical roots. And since then, obviously it's evolved a lot from being a newspaper to then, getting a .com. And now the South China Morning Post is trying to really build up its digital presence and become a more global newsroom. For a long time, it has covered Hong Kong and a lot of the different stories in Hong Kong. But as it's getting bigger, and as China is becoming a bigger power on the world stage, it's really amping up to cover China in many different ways. So this is like a concept that the South China Morning Post had wanted to create. But at the same time, they weren't exactly sure how to enter the world of new media. And that's how Clarissa and I ended up on this side of the world as people who, are writers and reporters, but have also dabbled a lot in new media. Myself coming from AJ Plus. And that's also originally how Clarissa and I met when we worked on a documentary together about the Chinese community down in Los Angeles in the San Gabriel Valley. So yes, Goldthread was something that, we knew had to be covered because there's pretty much nothing like it in terms of covering Chinese food, culture, travel, and people with the accuracy, with the insight that we're able to get, the level of access we're able to get, and also just the historical and cultural background that we believe is very important. You know, even for me as a Chinese American, so much of what I know about Chinese history, Chinese American history, I didn't learn it until I moved to Oakland and moved to California after college. And I think that part of knowing about our background, our history, how immigrants came to the U.S., that's still something that media doesn't quite cover. And maybe it's because the population is relatively small in the U.S., even though the Asian population is the fastest growing group. It's still like not very well covered in media and not very well taught in schools. So it gives us an opportunity to fill that gap. So it looks like, hopefully we answered all of the questions. Oh, which social media platform are you sharing in content in mainland? We haven't quite shared our content in mainland yet. We've been uploading little videos here and there. Truthfully, you know, we are making the content more with our U.S. friends in mind. The people I usually think of are just like friends and family back home. And our team is really, really small. We haven't gotten to the point yet where we are translating our content in both directions. So we don't have a clear Chinese platform yet.
Our next one is by Francis. Do you see the rise of the Chinese economy making affordable cities such as Chengdu, Kunming, Chongqing becoming more culturally trendier as coastal cities like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen become pricier and more stressful to live in? Definitely. So I actually, since I've been here, haven't been to Shanghai or Beijing, just because I personally, you know, I lived in Shanghai for 3 months in college and I don't really like mega cities, but I've been to Chengdu and Kunming, and this is where you see sort of the more underground culture start to pop up. We met a lot of musicians in Chengdu. I met a lot of I got a rapper in Kunming, which we're doing a story about, and a heavy metal singer who's also a mushroom forager in Kunming.
Right.
And I do think it's just because it's more affordable there, and these places are considered somewhat like the hipster towns of China right now.
Yeah, and especially, you know, I've been to Chengdu. Sorry, guys, I keep dropping this thing. So I've been to Chengdu, and it actually really reminds me of Oakland in terms of its spirit. It's known to be the lesbian capital of China, and just comparing some of the struggles of musicians here in Hong Kong to those in the mainland. If you look just at rent, you can get an apartment in Chengdu for a few $100, maybe $200-300 USD per month, whereas here in Hong Kong it's in the thousands, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you can find an apartment here for $1,000 per month USD, you're quite lucky. So if your housing and your cost of living is so high, then how do you invest in art and how do you invest in music?
And a lot of these people that I talk to when I'm there, they're just like, we're so geographically far from the government, like physically far from the government, that they don't necessarily consider themselves a part of the establishment, if you will. So when I'm in Yunnan, they refer to people not from Yunnan as Wai Shenzhen, or outsiders. So they see their province as a distinct place.
Yeah, and I think now is a good time. If you haven't looked at a map of China recently, you should pull one up and see just exactly where these cities are and get a sense of how large this country is. Like Chengdu, for example, is right smack dab in the middle of the country. It's kind of like Kansas City geographically only. So that's why, you know, you have this removal. And, you know, cities like Beijing, I personally kind of hate Beijing, but we can just leave that here.
Yeah, and the diversity, too, when you get further out from the coastal cities as well is astonishing. You know, Yunnan has the highest concentration of ethnic minorities in the entirety of China. Sichuan, there's the Tibetan Plateau, there's the Qiang minority as well. So there's just so many more there's so much more traditional culture, I would say, when you get further out from the coastal cities.
Okay, so we're going to see if we have any more questions. Otherwise, I think we are going to wrap up our first late night show, because it's probably really late now over there on the East Coast. And we have to get back to our business as well. So we hope to be doing this again. We'll be taking a little break for 2 weeks. Goldthread is actually coming to the U.S., aka I'm coming to the U.S. I'll be in Houston next week, there for the Asian American Journalist Conference and doing some meetups. And after that, I will be heading to LA, and we're throwing a meetup in LA where we'll be screening some of our content. So if you guys are in Los Angeles, come to our event. We've been posting it and sharing it on Eventbrite, Twitter, Facebook. It's going to be on August 18th. It's a very, very auspicious date, August 18th on 2018. And we'll be hosting it at Lucky Wheels Downtown Garage. Lucky Wheels Motorcycle Garage. There will be free food and drinks. So come through so I can get to meet more of you. Can we interview Travis? I'm definitely going to interview Travis Scott. Travis Scott, please come to Hong Kong when you watch this. We want to interview you too. All right, folks. Good night. We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
And now, live from Hong Kong,
And that's a wrap.
it's Late
Okay, that was
Night
not bad.
with Goldthread. Our host, Dolly Lee, and guest host, Clarissa Wei. It's Late Night with Goldthread. Might not actually be nighttime.